Legend has it that somewhere in upstate New York, there's a strongbox containing between $50 to $150 million worth of valuables buried by the now deceased bootlegger and gangster Dutch Schultz. And some people believe he left clues while he was dying on his deathbed from an infection called peritonitis after being shot by members of the Murder Inc. hit team hired by the Commission of the Five Families in New York in 1935. The valuables that Schultz buried are said to have consisted of gold coins, $1,000 bills, uncashed Liberty bonds from World War I, and diamonds, even though it has yet to be proven that the treasure exists and its location is still unclear, although some people believe they know the roundabout area where the treasure is buried. With or without proof, treasure hunters out there have still set out on missions to find the treasure in the past and still continue their efforts today. In an episode of a PBS show, Secrets of the Dead, Gangster's Gold, they featured a show on which 3 different teams went out in search of Schultz gold and diamonds, finding hideouts and hidden tunnels along the way, hoping new technology will help them retrieve the gangster's buried treasures from his illegal rackets during the Prohibition era. In an episode of PBS show Secrets of the Dead, Gangster's Gold, they featured a show in which 3 different teams went out in search of Schultz gold and diamonds, finding hideouts and hidden tunnels along the way, hoping new technology will help them retrieve the gangster's buried treasures from his illegal rackets during the Prohibition era. Dutch Schultz was originally born under the birth name Arthur Simon Fledgeheimer on August 6, 1901, by parents Erman and Emma Fledgeheimer, who were of German and Jewish descent. Schultz grew up in the Bronx, New York, and earned a reputation in the criminal underworld as a feared and tough gangster, and made his money off various rackets, including the numbers racket, and especially off of bootlegging during the Prohibition era from 1920 to 1933. Schultz seen the potential to earn a serious profit with the Prohibition laws in effect and took control of the alcohol supply to the Bronx and some of New Jersey, where his M.O. was simply to extort every speakeasy in the Bronx by intimidating and threatening them, and it worked. One story that stands out is when Schultz and a partner kidnapped and tortured a man who was refusing to do business with him. And according to an article on livescience.com, it said they hung a man by his thumbs and took a rag that was dipped in gonorrhea sores and covered his face after torturing him. It was quoted, "After he was ransomed and released, he went blind from the infection." The moral of the story was people in the Bronx weren't quick to turn Schultz down. Later on in Schultz's criminal career, he got into the Harlem numbers racket and extortion in the restaurant business, and is said to have made $12 to $14 million just off his Harlem numbers racket per year. Although most of Schultz's criminal rackets were based in New York City, it said he also frequented upstate New York, where he would take care of some breweries he owned, and while on trial for 2 tax evasion cases, would also frequent upstate to pay bribes and make sure he was in good standing with the people. Despite Schultz's knack for being a gangster, he encountered problems with the Commission of the Five Families in New York after he met with Lucky Luciano to discuss a plot to take out U.S. Attorney Thomas Dewey, where he asked permission to do the hit and was told no because the hit would bring too much attention from law enforcement. Dewey was the attorney going after Schultz for non-payment of federal taxes, so when Schultz was told by the commission no, he got angry and said he was going to kill him anyway, and walked out of the meeting. On October 23, 1935, Schultz was in a Newark, New Jersey restaurant called Palace Chop House. Him and his gang were approached by 2 hitmen from Murder Inc. and was ultimately shot along with his 2 partners. Schultz's partners eventually died from their wounds along with Schultz, who would die from an infection from the gunshot to his side, but before he passed from peritonitis, Schultz was heard rambling what some believe are clues to where the gangster's gold was buried. Although Schultz was on morphine and hallucinating from the infection, Schultz was heard talking about his collection of papers and saying he had over $1 million to $5 million buried. And it wasn't only Schultz's deathbed ramblings, but his lawyer spoke out and said he seen Schultz with the strongbox and it was filled with money and coins, and said Schultz even told him he was going to bury it so the government could never find it. But Schultz wasn't expecting to be shot, so he may never have been able to retrieve his loot before he was killed. According to people who were around at the time, police wrote down everything he said, and between police and treasure hunters, they believe they found the roundabout area in upstate Phoenicia, New York, and treasure maps of the area have even been drawn up. Although there is no definitive proof, that hasn't stopped people from searching almost a century later. Schultz got his criminal career started when he dropped out of school and joined a local street gang. Schultz, who was originally Arthur Fledgeheimer, stole the nickname Dutch Schultz from another gangster in his neighborhood. During the beginning of the Prohibition era, Schultz got into the bootlegging game and started bringing liquor to the Bronx and making his own beer as well. Only after a couple years, Schultz became known as one of the most ruthless gangsters in New York City. It's said that at one time, Schultz had about 100 shooters running and protecting his criminal enterprise. But when one of Schultz's partners, Legs Diamond, decided to split and do his own thing, he started stealing shipments of Schultz liquor, and it caused an all-out war between the two different crews. After Diamond was caught lacking by one of Schultz's shooters and was shot 17 times on December 19, 1931, it ended the war, and it said Schultz was making around $20 million a year off his rackets. Not long after, in 1933, Dutch Schultz was charged with tax evasion, and the trial was moved to a small town in upstate New York. In order to beat his case, Schultz hired a public relations team to change his public image, and the con paid off. Schultz changed his wardrobe for the duration of the trial and donated a substantial amount of money to charity, and was ultimately acquitted of his charges, which only made police back in the Bronx more determined to throw Schultz under the jail. Due to the heat coming down on him, Schultz wanted to take out the New York City Special Prosecutor Thomas Dewey, and he had a meeting with members of the commission and asked for permission to kill Dewey. The commission refused, and Schultz stormed out, telling them he was doing the hit anyway. While Schultz was with his gang plotting their hit on Dewey on October 23, 1935 at the Palace Chop House, Charlie the Bug Workman of the infamous Murder Inc. hit team walked into the bathroom and shot Schultz, and then went on to kill 3 other members of Schultz's gang. Schultz didn't die immediately and was rushed to the hospital, where he eventually slipped into a coma and soon after died at the age of 33. But before Schultz decided to try to kill Dewey, and after Prohibition ended, Schultz turned to the numbers racket and gambling, where he made a fortune. But this attracted the attention of law enforcement, and Schultz ended up indicted on tax evasion and spent months on the run, but eventually turned himself in. The next year, Schultz was tried twice for evasion, where the first case ended with a hung jury, and the second trial he was acquitted. In a 1960 New York Post article, Stephanie St. Clair, aka Madam St. Clair, also known throughout Harlem as the Numbers Queen, declared she was the only black banker to fight off Schultz from trying to overthrow black folks' numbers racket in Harlem. During that time period in 1935, the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, had labeled Dutch Schultz as public enemy #1, saying he was one of New York's and the whole nation's most treacherous bootleggers and gangsters of that era. Schultz was known for using violent tactics to try and intimidate black and Latino people and take over their lottery rackets. With the threat of violence, he would give the people the option of either giving up their business to work for him or keeping their business and paying Schultz a percentage. In that same 1960 New York Post article, Stephanie St. Clair also criticized her fellow black bankers for not standing up against Schultz and other white racketeers. She said she fought Schultz from 1931 to 1935, and it cost 820 days in jail and $750,000. She said she wasn't afraid of Schultz and that she would kill him if he stepped foot in Harlem, and even called him a rat. Eventually, even though Schultz was stealing black owners' numbers racket profits, because of St. Clair's pushback, Schultz put a contract on St. Clair to have her killed, but the contract was void after Schultz was shot down first in Newark, New Jersey on that fatal day. During that hit on Schultz, the only other person who knew where Dutch Schultz buried his chest full of valuables, his bodyguard Lulu Rosencrantz, was also shot and killed with Schultz, and the secret of where the Prohibition gold mine was buried died with them. Over the years, stories surfaced that Lulu had drawn a map and mentioned Esopus Creek, which flows through Phoenicia, to the nurse attending to him the night he passed away. Despite Schultz being in and out and delirious with 106 fever, having peritonitis from his gunshot, and being high off morphine, people believe his ramblings before he passed contain clues to the location of his buried treasure, which you can research online. Although there is no way to prove that the money has never been retrieved, it's very possible it could still be out there, and people from all around still go to Phoenicia to search the area. I hope you enjoyed this video and a little bit of background on the gangster Dutch Schultz. Thank you for watching WISEGUY TV. Please like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for more great content.